All right, welcome to this video on writing the long essay question response. The essay question I always thought is misnamed because you'll see that it's really a short essay. I don't want you to get intimidated by that name, long essay. In this video, I'm going to walk you through the scoring rubric that the College Board uses to score the LEQ. And I'm also going to show you how to structure this essay so that you can be sure to earn all the points possible. So it'll be a longer video, but it's going to give you a lot of good information for writing an essay in history. Also make note that a lot of what we talk about in this video will also apply to the DBQ essay question. So while there will be separate videos for certain aspects of the DBQ, for the most part, what's in this video about writing an essay applies to both types. Let me start by reminding you where the LEQ fits in the context of the exam. So the exam has 4 parts to it. The first part is the multiple choice, which will be quickly followed by the short answer questions. Then there'll be a slightly longer break. And after the break, in part 2, you'll write your 2 essays. The DBQ essay comes first, and the long essay is the last thing you'll write on the exam. Now, with that in mind, it is very common for students to get tired, okay? This is a long exam. It's over 3 hours long. And especially in that second half where you are doing a lot of writing, your hand can get tired. You can lose focus. You can start to feel like, oh, is this over already? You don't want to let that happen. The LEQ comes last, and you can see it's not weighted as high as the DBQ essay, but it's still an important chunk of the exam. We don't want to take a low score here when this could be the difference between a 4 and a 5. I also want to point out to you that you will have 100 minutes total to write these 2 essays, the DBQ and the LEQ. It's a free-flowing period of time. So if you spend a few more minutes on the DBQ essay, that's okay. Just know that you'll have a little less for the long essay and vice versa. But we want to use all of those 100 minutes and get into the habit of writing LEQs in 35 to 40 minutes. That'll be good preparation for the exam. And then finally, while we're on this slide, the way the LEQ is set up is they're going to provide you with 3 different essay questions, and they're going to ask you to choose one of them to respond to. Now, all 3 will be very similar in style. So as we'll talk about in a second, remember there are different types of historical thinking skills, for example, like comparison. Odds are all 3 then would be comparison essays. However, each of the 3 will be from a different time period. So students often choose which essay to write based on which topic or time period they're most comfortable with. Keep that in mind, there will be a choice. You're only writing one of these. All right, let's remind you what those historical reasoning skills are. So these are the 3 C's. When we compare in an essay, we're talking about what is both similar and different between 2 things, 2 eras, 2 events, 2 developments. And we're also, as always, we're explaining the significance of those similarities and differences. Maybe we're talking about why they exist. In a causation essay, we're talking cause and effect. So again, we're identifying and describing the causes of an event or the effects of an event. We're also talking about how they developed and why. And then finally, in continuity and change, or a CCOT essay, we are talking about how things either changed over time or stayed relatively the same over time. We're not just pointing out trivial similarities and differences over time, but we're getting into how they changed or why they stayed the same. We're always going deeper. Remember, the key to writing essays is to analyze, to explain. And that often means you're answering the questions how and why, right? So I remind you of these because this is key to writing a good essay. To quickly identifying what type of essay is it, what reasoning skill will I be employing, and to make sure that you know what that means and what that looks like. All right, let's walk through the rubric for the LEQ. So you'll notice right at the top here that this is a 6-point rubric. So there are 6 possible points to earn. We, of course, want to earn all 6. And I think you'll see as I take you through the structure of this essay that it guarantees you'll earn all 6. The order in which this rubric is set up is not necessarily the order in which you'll write your essay. And that's why I'm a big believer in giving you a structure for your essay. But when we go through that structure, you'll see all these points are there. So one of the points will be earned for establishing a good thesis or claim. Now, note what it says here in the scoring criteria. It means you're responding to the prompt with a historically defensible thesis or claim that establishes a line of reasoning. That's a lot of words, but what this basically means is your thesis is historically relevant, it's significant. You're saying something important. What I like to say is you're not simply regurgitating the prompt. You're not saying something very generic that really anybody reading this prompt could make up, okay? A lot of times I will tell students that if I could pull a kid out of the hallway, just a random kid out of the hallway, and show them the prompt, the question, if they could give, just by pulling it out of thin air, if they could give the thesis that you wrote, they could make that up with no knowledge of history whatsoever, then that's not a good thesis. So we need something that's historically defensible. You're saying something that shows you have a knowledge of history, that you've thought about this, you understand this, and it can't just be made up, okay? So we'll work on that quite a bit. Another point is earned for contextualization. So depending on where we are in the course right now, you've probably, if we're a few months in, you've probably heard me talk about historical context a lot. Remember, contextualization means you're placing something in a broader context. You're placing whatever the topic of the essay is, you're placing it into a broader period of time. You're showing how it kind of fits in to what I often call the big picture. Now, we're going to talk about how to do this in an essay, but normally it means that in your essay, you're talking about what preceded this particular time period, or what follows after it, or something else that's going on at the same time that's going to help us understand it better. Okay, so we'll get into that more. But contextualization is important. It's something you want to be thinking about throughout the course. The rest of the rubric, a little bit more detail here. We next talk about evidence. So in history, and when you're writing a history essay, you're going to make a claim. You're going to develop a thesis. You're going to say something important about history. Then you need to be able to back that up. Whatever it is, this claim that you're making, you need to be able to support it with specific historical evidence. You've heard me probably use that phrase by now too. I often use the acronym SHE or SHE, specific historical evidence. We want our evidence to be specific, meaning we don't want to talk about history in very broad, vague, or abstract ways. We want to talk about real events, real people, real developments. If they have a name, if historians refer to something by a particular name, we want to use that. That's specific historical evidence. Now, you'll notice that you don't just get points for naming this evidence or listing it or identifying it. To get 2 points here, we need to use that evidence to support our argument. It needs to be clear in your essay how this evidence you're citing supports your claim. And so I will show you how to do that in what I call a 2-step process. And then finally, we get points for what's called analysis and reasoning. So 1 point is for using those historical reasoning skills. So we go back to those 3, and again, this is why it's so important to identify in the prompt, what skill am I using? You know, when you write a history essay, this might be a helpful way to think about it. You're not writing a story. You're not simply telling us what happened in the past. When you write a history essay, on some level, you're assuming that the reader knows the story. What you're doing is you're in this case either comparing things or talking about cause and effect or showing continuity and change over time. You're going much deeper than what happened. You're doing analysis. You're talking about and analyzing what happened in the past. Now, that doesn't mean that you never tell the story in your essay, but that's actually a very small part of it. You want to go beyond that to explain the past, talk about how things happen, talk about why they happen, show those similarities, differences, causes, effects, continuities, changes. That's what we're looking to do in our essay. So it's imperative that in your analysis, you're using those historical reasoning skills. You're showing us the similarities and differences if it's comparison, and you're explaining how or why they're similar or different. I sometimes use the analogy of, a sporting event. So you watch a football game. Now, you watch the football game, and then after the game's over, you turn on a show that's going to do post-game analysis. The person who's doing that post-game analysis, this news person or expert, they're not telling you everything that happened in the game. They're not just recounting every play of the game and telling it like it's a story. They're analyzing what happened in the game. Now, occasionally they'll mention a play. They might even describe it. Maybe they'll show you a replay, a video of that play. But then they're going to go deeper. They're going to explain why that play was significant to the game or what it revealed about this team. That analogy only goes so far, but analysis is going beyond the what, the who, the when, the where. It's getting into those deeper questions of how, why. And then lastly, the other point is called the point for complex understanding. So again, depending on where we are in this course, you've probably heard me say by now that history is far more complex than we realize, or that you've learned at a younger grade. They want to see if you have a grasp of that complexity. So you get this point for, as it says, demonstrating a complex understanding of the historical development that's the focus of the prompt. Now, when it says using evidence to corroborate, qualify, modify an argument, okay, that's a little confusing. That last column is helpful. You'll see there are a bunch of bullet points. These are different ways that you can achieve this complex understanding point. And we will at various times talk about these different ways. But I always find that the easiest way to earn this point is that second bullet. If it is a comparison essay and you are discussing and analyzing both similarities and differences, not just comparing, but also contrasting, not just contrasting, but also comparing. If you're doing both thoroughly in your essay, you'll learn this point. Likewise, if it's continuity and change, do both. If it's causation and you're really just talking about causes, identify multiple causes and discuss them, or do causes and the effects. If you keep that in mind and you always strive to do both, you should always earn this point. Now, for just one more second, look at the very last line in that box, the lower right part of the screen. It says, this understanding must be a part of the argument, not merely a phrase or reference. You'll see something like that in all of the rubric. Just throwing in a little footnote, just throwing in a little sentence here. Oh, and there's also another cause. Here it is. That doesn't earn you this point. This needs to be well developed. It needs to be part of the overall argument. There needs to be substance to these things. So keep that in mind as well. Just a sentence usually isn't enough to earn most of these points.